Hello everyone, I'm Kat from the Littlestown Library, the Adams County Library System, and welcome to our tiny art for adults and teens. We're very glad you could join us today. So the painting that we're going to be doing is of an autumn field. So there's a little cabin or barn out in a field, and then there's some autumn leaves, autumn trees in the front there. So this is the painting that we'll be doing today. Now you're welcome to use any supplies that you have at home if you have them available. If you've signed up for a tiny art kit, then in your kit you will receive a blank 4x4 canvas, which also comes with a little easel to put that on. If it's more comfortable for you, you can lay the canvas flat and paint on it that way if you would like, but you will have the easel included. Now note that the canvas that you receive is going to be a lot thinner than the ones that I have. Mine are very thick, but yours are going to be a little bit thinner. So when you're painting, you won't have as much of the sides to worry about as I will. So just keep that in mind. You won't be using as much paint. You'll also be getting 6 paint pots with the following colors. You'll be getting red, orange, yellow, blue, brown, and white. So those are the colors that will be included in your tiny art kit, and you will also receive a paintbrush as well. So all of that is included in the art kit. Other things that you will need will be a flat place to work, some newspapers or a paper plate to set the canvas on, so that way the paint, if you drip paint, it won't get everywhere. And you also want a container of some kind that has clean water in it, so you'll use that to clean your brush in between colors, and a paper towel to dry off your brush. So without further ado, let's get painting.
So the first color that you'll want to use is the sky blue. So you'll want to take that and start painting across the top portion of the canvas. You can, depending on how much sky you want, you can have either just the top quarter, or you can go all the way down to the top third. Again, that depends on how much sky you want to have here. So you just want to go ahead and paint that on. It doesn't need to be very heavy or very thick, and just spread that out nice and thin. Make sure that you get the sides and the corners. And I apologize in advance for any of the weird shadows that you might see on the canvas. I was painting this at home, and the lighting situation is not always as nice there as it is in other locations. And the very bottom portion of this of the blue will be covered up by the field of yellow, so you don't have to have it really heavy down at the bottom, but you do want to extend the blue a little bit further down than the end of where you want your sky, your horizon line to be. All right, and when that's ready, you just want to let that sit and dry for about 10 minutes. Okay, now that your sky is all dry, you'll want to take your brown and use that to make the little barn cabin, just basically kind of a rectangle shape that extends down, sort of spans a little bit between the sky and the section that's still white. And then you'll want to make kind of a triangle, trapezoid sort of shape for the roof. It doesn't have to be very detailed. If you have a finer brush, that makes this part a little bit easier. We had to kind of go with sort of a mid-range brush that does all sorts of different things, so it's not exactly the best for this kind of smaller, angular sort of shape. So just kind of want to extend that down a little. And it can be kind of rough and fuzzy at this moment. This is just to kind of give you the rough outline and idea of where it's supposed to be. We'll fine tune that later. And now we want to take your yellow and paint the bottom portion of your canvas. This will be the field and the background for some of the leaves. And since the dark brown is still a little wet, at this point you'll want to keep the yellow from touching that, otherwise it'll get smeared and mess up the rest of the canvas. So you want to leave a little bit of space around that. And I know on this canvas, when I did my initial painting, I actually had used black for the little barn cabin. So you'll see it's black on here, but you should be using the dark brown. So yours will actually be a little bit lighter than what we've got here. Get along the edges. Then you'll want to take the brush and kind of do sort of a little swoops up over into the blue, because that'll give you the impression of the field, the grasses, the long grasses. It's okay if they look a little bit green on the edges right now. We'll be going over this again later to make it a brighter yellow, so once it's dry, so don't worry about that. Just go ahead and keep making the little grass shades, little grass stalks. Making sure you don't touch the black with your yellow because it's still wet. Once you're done with the yellow, you will want to let this sit for about 10 minutes to dry. Okay, now that that is dry, or mostly dry, you'll want to take a little bit of red and put that over your little barn here. It's okay that the red will kind of smear and sort of see-through. You'll see the underlying color. That's okay, because we'll be going over this with another coat a little bit later to brighten it up. This is to just get that initial red down to give you that barn color. And you'll notice I'm trying to keep sort of the brush areas a little bit separate, where you kind of have the front here, the front of the cabin, you have the top portion of the roof, and then the side. Again, they're not very well defined because this is a very large brush for this kind of work, and this is very impressionistic, just to give you a suggestion of what this structure looks like. end up wanting to make your barn or your cabin a little bit bigger, you can certainly do that. I kept mine tiny because this is supposed to be seen in the distance, like on a hilltop sort of thing. So that's why I tried to keep it small, because things that are far away look small. So now we're going to be working on the foreground. So you'll want to get your brown ready, because we'll want to be making the trees that are in the foreground, or the fence posts. Like mine are a little bit tall. If I wanted them to be like the tops of trees and we're seeing over the trees to a hill, I should have made them a little bit shorter, but they could be fence posts, you know, in the front with like bushes and vines wrapped around them. So it doesn't really matter, whatever works for you. You'll probably have to go over the brown a little bit. It'll be a little streaky, and it's okay. They'll be mostly covered up by the autumn leaves, so you just want to give sort of a general suggestion of the tree trunks or fence posts, whichever one you decide to do. So once you've got your trees, the trunks ready there, then you'll want to get some orange and just dab that around. If you don't want to smear the brown, you can wait until that dries before adding in the orange. But since you get brown leaves mixed in with orange leaves on the trees, it doesn't really matter. That's up to you. So we'll just dab those around. Give the impression of the autumn leaves here. This is always the fun part. You just kind of put little dabs everywhere. And it's okay to leave the yellows showing through, because these are leaves, so you're going to be able to see through, and there will be yellow leaves in there as well. We've got a layer of orange in, we're going to put in some red. So I generally try to keep the red closer to the trunks to sort of be more inside. Or if you want to make like some of the trees have primarily orange leaves and other ones have primarily red leaves, you can do that too. I just had a mixture of red and orange leaves on all of my trees. But that was my personal preference there. So if you want to have the trees be a little bit more distinct from one another rather than kind of blending together, you can do that by like just using orange on some of the trees and just using red for other ones. Back and adding a little more orange in, because I got a little bit carried away with the red. So I'm adding a little bit of orange in, and then getting some yellow, starting to blend the bottom of the cabin in and sort of make it look like it is sitting in the field, that there's grasses growing up in front of it. Again, it's okay if it smears, if the red and brown from the cabin smear a little bit into the yellow, because that gives it sort of a shadow look. And I'm going back over the yellow for the field, over those areas that looked a little too green before adding an extra layer of the yellow on that, so it makes it a little brighter. So this you'll want to let sit for about 15 to 20 minutes because there's a lot of paint on the canvas and you want to make sure it's dry before the next step. Okay, now that that's dry and we have a little bit more light on the subject because it got a little dark, we're taking some red and going back to our barn. See, I'm doing the side wall across there. On the roof. A little bit too much paint there. I'll have to spread that out a little bit more. You can see this is where I'm defining the roof a little bit better. Defining the barn itself a little better as to where the sides are, where the roof ends, all that fun stuff. This is all very general. I am not very good at painting buildings, so that's why we're kind of doing an impressionistic style. Because impressionism is very, very forgiving for those of us who can't paint architectural structures. You'll notice that the front of the barn kind of looks a bit like an arrow pointing upwards because it's got sort of a triangle cone and then the bottom. So it does, if you kind of keep that arrow shape in mind for the very front of the barn to make that sort of distinct from the side and the rest of the roof. Taking a little more yellow. Adding that on, you see our field is starting to really come together now. We still have a little bit of green, but that's okay, to sort of give it a haze in the background. And even in autumn, there's still some places and some things that are still green. And putting a little bit more of the yellow near the barn as well. Edges. We are integrating the barn a little bit better. Again, since the red's still wet, it'll smudge a bit with the yellow, and that's okay because that gives the barn a bit of a shadow. Which again makes it look like it's actually sitting in the field as opposed to just kind of floating there. We're getting some of the brown again, and we are more sharply defining the front of the building to keep that more distinct, a little more in shadow, and to distinguish the roof from the side wall there. Again, nothing exact, just kind of giving it a little bit more definition so that way it looks more three-dimensional rather than just a flat shape. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just all, again, impressionism, giving it an impression. And taking a little bit of red and using that to define the roof more sharply, since that's where the sun would be, you know, shining down on it. This is where a thinner brush would really come in handy, but we'll just use the edge of the brush we have. So there we are, making the roof with that kind of that side stroke. It makes it almost look a little bit more like wooden slats or shingles, at least from a distance. There we go. So the barn is more or less complete. Might be a little bit more detailing we can do, but for now we're going to use a little bit of yellow to break up some of this mass of orange and red that currently is my section of trees. It's a little bit too blobby for my taste, so I'm just breaking that up a little bit, trying to make it look a little bit more like leaves and less like I just dumped paint on the canvas. And we're going to define the base, the lower portion of the trunks a little bit more sharply, and have a couple of the parts of the trunk sort of show through the leaves a little bit better, so you can kind of tell that yes, there is a tree or a fence post, however you chose to do that, behind all of the undergrowth. So just making that a little bit darker, a little bit more distinct. Suggestion of branches hiding among the leaves. A little bit drier, and continue to integrate that into the field. So it looks like the field's growing up around it. And for our final touch, we are going to take some white and put some puffy clouds in the sky. If you have a really fine-tipped brush, then you can always, if you wanted to, you could add some more detail to the barn, like, you know, windows or doors, or defining the slats in the wood a little bit better, but my brush is not fine enough for that, so I'm just going to leave the cabin or the barn as it is, rather than trying to mess with it more, because I'm afraid I'll ruin it if I do. So we got some nice puffy clouds, and I'm going to take a little bit of orange, I think, and touch up a few places on the trees. Just for the final. Yep, just a couple spots. I feel like touching up a little bit better. And there you go. We have an autumn scene. of a barn or a cabin out in a field in front of some trees.